Imagine someone you know. Maybe they're constantly checking multiple apps on their phone for their next job, stressing about how they'll pay for a sudden visit to the ER because they don't have sick leave, all while carrying, a pretty significant chunk of credit card debt. And yet when you ask them about their financial future, they tell you they feel confident they'll achieve their goals. Sounds like a stark contradiction, doesn't it?
It really does.
But for millions of Americans working in this booming gig economy, this complex, sometimes paradoxical reality is their everyday experience.
It absolutely is a fascinating and challenging dynamic. We often hear the surface level stuff about the gig economy, the flexibility of the side hustles for extra cash.
Right.
But when you actually move beyond those headlines and really dig into the detailed data, the research, well, the financial picture for many gig workers is just far more complex. And for a lot of them, it's frankly quite precarious. There are these deep financial vulnerabilities that often get overlooked, existing right alongside this, like you said, surprising undercurrent of optimism and perceived confidence.
And that's precisely what we're getting into today. We're doing a genuine deep dive into the financial landscape of American gig workers. We want to understand what the latest research, the data, the analysis really says about the, significant financial challenges so many of them face.
Yeah.
And where does this reported high level of financial confidence come from?
Yeah.
Especially when you see those challenges side by side.
Right. The paradox.
Exactly. And what does this whole complex reality mean? Not just for the individuals doing the work, but, for the broader economic and social systems we rely on, especially when you think about things like benefits and security.
Okay, so to guide us through this pretty complex territory, our insights are drawn from a stack of really compelling sources. We've gone deep into a detailed academic study that looked specifically at gig workers' financial confidence and behavior using these large survey data sets. We've also brought in analysis from the Brookings Institution that gives us critical insights into the benefits gap in the gig economy and, importantly, proposes some potential solutions.
Useful.
And we've looked at survey data from Experian, too, which adds another layer to our understanding of the specific financial challenges and that, overall optimism that gig workers report.
So our mission today is really to unpack all of this rich material, to get beyond the simple stories and understand the detailed, sometimes contradictory financial picture for this huge and rapidly growing part of the U.S. workforce.
Yeah.
We want to pull out the crucial details, the key insights, to help you understand what's truly happening on the ground. I mean, what stands out to you right away when you think about this dynamic? The hustle, the uncertainty, and yet this reported confidence.
It's that contrast, definitely.
We're going to explore the landscape of gig work, dive deep into those financial challenges, and then really grapple with this fascinating paradox of confidence before looking at potential ways to address the gaps.
Okay, sounds good. Let's really unpack this by starting with the basics. What is the gig economy? It's a term we hear all the time, but our sources actually help us lay out a more precise definition.
Right. It's easy to think it's totally new, born from smartphones and apps. But as Kalberg and Dunn pointed out, back in 2016, it's not entirely unprecedented. They basically described it as a digital version of work arrangements that have been around forever. Big traditional casual labor, freelance work, other kinds of contingent jobs where you're not a permanent full-time employee at one company.
Exactly. The digital platforms just provide this new, very efficient way to connect workers and tasks.
Yeah, the infrastructure.
Precisely. And while maybe early on people talked about the sharing or collaborative side of it, like Tudoli Sami's noted, a really defining feature of the modern gig economy, especially platform work, is the algorithmic control. Jarahi and Sutherland highlighted this.
Algorithmic control meaning?
Meaning these platforms use algorithms to manage pretty much everything. Assigning tasks, setting pay rates, evaluating how workers perform, sometimes even nudging worker behavior with incentives or demerits.
Okay. And critically, there's that on-demand feature, which Block and Hennessy emphasized. Workers can often just log in, be available whenever they choose, and consumers can request services like right now.
Instantaneously, yeah.
Which allows for flexibility, sure, but also creates that income variability we hear so much about. And this term gig economy, it actually covers a really broad range of roles, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Chang defined it pretty comprehensively. Independent freelancers, project-based contractors, consultants, those on-demand temporary workers hooked up through platforms.
It's a very diverse group. And that diversity is actually part of the challenge when you're trying to analyze it or address the needs of this workforce. But regardless of the specific type of work, what's really clear is the sheer scale and the rapid growth of this sector.
Yeah, the numbers are pretty staggering. Even back in 2018, the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimated something like 16.5 million people were involved.
A huge number already. And the growth was steep even before, recent events really kicked things into high gear. Holtz-Eakin, Geddes, and Reinhardt's analysis showed gig worker numbers grew way faster than traditional employment between 2002 and 2014.
How much faster?
Somewhere between 9.4% and 15% growth for gig workers compared to just 7.5% growth in total employment over that period. So significantly outpacing.
Wow. And the time commitment.
Yeah. Upwork's 2018 data was already striking. Americans spending over 1 billion hours per week doing gig work. And that was a notable jump from just 2015. So the trend was definitely well established.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting and where the pandemic seems to have just poured fuel on the fire.
Major accelerant, yeah. Guerin et al., using tax data cited by Brookings, found the number of platform workers more than doubled during the pandemic. Doubled. By 2021, they made up about 3% of the entire U.S. workforce, which, to put that in perspective, is roughly 30% of all self-employed people in the U.S. Millions and millions of people.
That's incredible. And other data might suggest even higher numbers.
Essentially, yeah. A Pew study from 2021, also cited by Brookings, suggested maybe 9% of the workforce had worked for an online platform in the past year.
So why the difference? 3% versus 9%?
Well, it might be down to tax reporting thresholds. Maybe people doing really occasional low-earning gigs aren't showing up in the tax data, but they still think of themselves as having done platform work when asked in a survey.
Makes sense.
But either way you slice it, whether it's 3% or 9% or somewhere in between, we're talking about a massive and growing slice of the labor force. I mean, just think about the scale of just a couple of the big platforms, right? Uber, DoorDash. They likely each have well over 1 million active drivers.
Yeah.
And their revenues have just exploded since, say, 2017. Uber's revenue quintupled in that time. Huge growth.
So who are these millions of people? That academic paper by Mitchell, Lee, and Decker, the one focused on financial confidence, gives us a bit of a demographic snapshot, right? Based on a big 2018 FinRA study.
Yes, their data gives us some valuable clues. And one point that might surprise some people is education level. Based on the 2018 BLS data and other studies they cite, gig workers, as a whole group, are slightly more educated than the overall workforce, on average. About half had a college degree or higher back in 2018.
Really? That is surprising.
One study even found over 2/3, 66% of American gig workers had at least some college education. But, and this is crucial, you have to remember how diverse the gig economy is.
Right.
That average education level hides a lot of variation depending on the type of gig work. High school freelancers, consultants, they often have postgraduate degrees, but workers in, say, on-call or temp staffing might have lower educational attainment.
Okay, that makes more sense. It's not one single group.
Yeah.
What about other demographics?
Yeah.
Like sex?
Well, the data shows some variation there, too, depending on the platform or the type of work. For instance, an older survey of Uber drivers cited in the paper showed a big majority, 86%, were male.
Okay.
But other types of freelance work, maybe creative gigs, that might skew differently. We need more granular data sometime.
And age. I always kind of picture younger people doing this.
Well, younger generations, millennials and Gen X, they definitely dominate the overall participation numbers. And interestingly, Gen Z actually reports the most positive attitudes towards gig work, so maybe suggests future growth there. The data also indicates a higher percentage are child-free or single compared to the traditional workforce. But, and this is important, it's not just a young person's game anymore.
No.
The sources point to a significant uptick in baby boomers joining in, often looking for supplemental income or maybe the ease of getting jobs or just a way to stay active in retirement.
So it's really multi-generational now. Does age affect how much people earn in the gig economy?
It certainly can, especially in roles where pay is tied to productivity, like ride sharing. Research on Uber earnings, for example, found that earnings tend to kind of flatten out for drivers between 20 and 40 and then actually decline with age.
Ooh, interesting. So potential challenges for older workers in certain roles.
Yeah, potentially. Roles where maybe physical stamina or really rapid task completion is key.
Okay. What about their employment outside the gig work? Are most people doing this full-time, relying on it completely?
That's a really, really important point that often gets missed in the simpler stories. Our sources show that less than half of gig workers rely on it as their only full-time job.
Less than half.
Yeah. The majority use gig work to supplement income from a traditional job, often a full-time one. For them, it's about making extra money, maybe gaining some job security by having multiple income streams, or adding flexibility around their main job.
That changes the picture quite a bit.
It does. That Uber driver survey cited by Brookings, it showed a real mix. 31% were already employed full-time somewhere else, and another 30% were employed part-time in addition to driving for Uber. So this dual employment thing is very common.
Which leads us right into motivations. Why do people do it, especially if it's often supplementing other work?
Well, the consensus across a bunch of sources, Alon, Cohen, and Sinshizri, Bajwa et al., Bernhardt and Thomason, it's pretty overwhelming. The number one reason is supplemental money.
Just needing more cash.
Basically, yeah. Boosting income, making ends meet, maybe saving for something specific.
But it's not always just about the money, is it?
Oh, definitely not. The sources also highlight other big incentives. Flexibility is huge, obviously. Setting your own hours, working when and where you want, often from home for certain gigs, being your own boss.
The autonomy factor.
Exactly. And other motivations pop up too. Pursuing work that feels more meaningful, maybe aligns better with personal interests, or developing new skills, enhancing employability generally. Several researchers touched on these non-financial draws.
So it's this kind of complex mix. Financial need bumping up against the appeal of control and flexibility.
Precisely. And some research goes even deeper, showing that money doesn't just influence if someone does gig work, but also how much they work.
How so?
Well, many gig workers show what researchers call income targeting. They might work really hard until they hit a specific income goal for the week or month and then ease off. Or if they're far from their target, they ramp up their hours.
So their work effort directly tracks their financial needs.
Very directly, yeah. It really shows that link between financial need and how much effort they put in within this model.
Okay, so we've got this picture. Large, growing, diverse workforce, often supplementing other income, valuing flexibility and control. Now, let's flip the coin. Let's talk about the significant financial challenges the research documents. This is where things get a lot more complicated, and for many, pretty tough.
Yeah, this is where that word precariousness really comes into play. Research by Petriglieri, Ashford, and Wrzniewski, and others found that gig workers are just statistically more likely to be financially precarious than folks in traditional jobs.
How do they define precarious?
Well, Bajwa et al. Linked gig work to key dimensions of precarious employment. Things like temporality, the work being short-term, or unstable social vulnerability, so lacking traditional worker protections, inadequate benefits, and often low or unpredictable income levels.
Let's start with debt.
Yeah.
What did the sources, especially the Mitchell-Lai-Decker paper, find there?
Well, the abstract states it pretty clearly. The majority of gig workers tend to have higher debt loads compared to non-gig workers.
Higher debt overall.
Yeah. And if you look at their detailed tables, breaking down debt types by demographics often found in the gig economy, you see higher rates of carrying credit card balances, having car loans, student loans, particularly among younger people, non-white individuals, lower income brackets, single or divorced folks, groups that, as we said, make up big chunks of the gig workforce.
And it's not just having debt, it's feeling like it's too much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The same data showed that people reporting they have too much debt was higher for demographics like women, people aged 25-54, non-white individuals, those earning under $50, people with less education again, all groups significantly represented in the gig economy.
And the Experian survey backed this up too.
It did. It added that gig workers often report having trouble accessing traditional, loans, decent credit cards, especially if gig work is their main or only income source.
Why is that?
Well, that fluctuating or non-traditional income can just make them look riskier to traditional lenders, so they can get stuck in this cycle where getting affordable credit is harder, which can push them towards worse options.
Right. And beyond debt, just managing day-to-day expenses, building any kind of cushion, that seems incredibly hard with variable income.
It's a huge hurdle. Prudential, Manika et al., they highlighted how those often lower, unpredictable incomes can make basic financial management just way harder than having a steady paycheck. And the data on handling unexpected expenses is, well, pretty stark.
How stark?
Edison Research found in 2018 that a massive 80% of primary gig workers, meaning most of their income came from gigs, reported difficulty paying for a $1,000 unexpected expense, like a car repair or a medical bill.
Wow, 80%. That's That's almost everyone in that group living right on the edge, one surprise bill away from real trouble.
It really underscores the lack of an emergency fund for so many people, and it gets even more granular. The same survey found 58% of full-time gig workers, a slightly different definition, but still reliant on gig income, couldn't even afford a $400 emergency bill.
Yeah.
Compare that to only 30% of non-gig workers. It shows a huge gap in just basic financial resilience.
Okay, so if covering a $400 emergency is that tough, saving for retirement must feel almost impossible for many.
Absolutely. Egon's data from 2016 was already worrying 44% with zero retirement savings, only 22% saving even occasionally. Oof. And more recent data cited by Brookings paints a similar picture. Less than 40% of non-traditional workers felt their retirement savings were on track. And 30% said they saved only some months, rarely, or never in the past year. It's incredibly hard to build long-term security without those employer plans and with income bouncing around.
What about just daily spending habits? Are they managing okay there?
Well, some sources noted gig workers often try to economize, which makes sense, right? You tighten your belt when the income is uncertain.
Sure.
But other observations suggest some might not be accurately calculating their true costs of doing business things like gas, car maintenance, insurance, those self-employment taxes.
Ah, the hidden costs.
Exactly. Which means they might underestimate their actual net income and end up overspending or undersaving without fully realizing it until it's too late.
Okay, now healthcare. This seems like a critical and maybe quite grim piece of the puzzle.
It really is. The Mitchell-Lynn-Decker paper abstract used this phrase. Gig workers suffer from cost-prohibitive healthcare utilization.
Meaning
in practice, they're less likely to go to the doctor when they should. They skip necessary tests, delay treatments, simply because they can't afford the costs, even sometimes with insurance.
And that leads straight to medical debt, which is already a huge issue in the U.S., but sounds like it's amplified here.
Exactly. Their data showed higher rates of unpaid medical debt for many of those same demographics we keep mentioning: women, people 25-54, non-white individuals, folks with incomes under $100, less education.
And their table, too, seemed to draw an even stronger statistical line between gig work and these healthcare struggles.
It did. They found strong positive associations between doing any kind of frequent or occasional additional work, especially tech-driven gig work, and having unpaid medical debt. And maybe even more worryingly, strong links with the not going to the doctor due to cost and not filling a prescription due to cost.
So it's not just debt on paper. It's people actively foregoing necessary medical care.
Precisely. And this is fundamentally tied to the lack of employer-sponsored health insurance that usually comes with a traditional job.
Right. How many are missing out on that?
Well, lack of health insurance was strongly associated with frequent or sometimes use of tech-driven gig work in their analysis, and Prudential's 2017 report had a striking number. Only 40% of primary gig workers had employer-sponsored medical insurance.
Only 40%, so the other 60% are.
Likely either uninsured, maybe relying on a spouse's plan if they have one, or trying to navigate the ACA exchanges, which can still be really expensive and complicated, especially when your income fluctuates month to month.
And not having that basic safety net has real consequences.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Hill's research showed many without traditional jobs just deferred needed health care because of cost. Bond and Liss Riordan highlighted how vulnerable gig workers are because they're typically excluded from benefits like paid sick leave and employer insurance.
Yeah, I remember the issue with paid leave during COVID.
Exactly. Liss Riordan pointed out they weren't included in the initial mandated paid leave legislation, so they faced this awful choice. Earn money you desperately need, or stay home and protect yourself and others during a pandemic, but get no income.
That's a direct link between their financial situation and public health risk, isn't it?
Right.
The Mitchell-Decker paper mentioned that too.
Yes, they specifically flagged that issue gig workers lacking sick leave during COVID, creating that untenable choice and potential exposure risk because they couldn't afford not to work. It really hammers home that these financial challenges aren't just personal problems. They have wider societal impacts on health and safety.
And all this constant uncertainty, the financial pressure, it must take a toll psychologically, too.
Absolutely. The research points to significant mental health strain. Ashford, Caterza, and Reed, and Petriglieri et al. Talked about the anxiety, the emotional ups and downs tied to this persistent financial and job insecurity. Edison research data showed primary gig workers had notably higher anxiety scores compared to people with another full-time job. They also worry a lot more about potential recessions, which is totally understandable given they lack that traditional safety net.
So it's not just numbers, it's real stress impacting well-being. Okay, let's touch on predatory lending. That seems like another danger zone when people are financially insecure.
Yeah, Table 2 in the Mitchell-Decker paper showed a strong positive link between doing additional work or tech-driven gig work and using predatory loans.
Like payday loans or title loans.
Exactly. And the paper discusses how these often come with insane triple-digit interest rates and really aggressive collection tactics. It creates this vicious cycle where borrowers just struggle to get ahead, often paying back way, way more than they originally borrowed.
A trap.
A devastating trap. And these lenders prey on financial desperation and lack of access to regular credit, which, as we've seen, is the reality for a lot of gig workers.
And finally, it's worth remembering, as Kusta's research showed, people often don't enter the gig economy from a position of strength.
Right. Sometimes they turn to it after their income drops, or they lose a traditional job, or they've had to burn through their savings. So financial distress from outside the gig economy can push people in, meaning they're starting from a vulnerable spot already. And while gig work offers potential income, the structure doesn't always fix those underlying issues and might even sometimes make them worse.
Okay, let's just pause and quickly recap those challenges because it's a lot. We've got high debt, trouble getting normal credit, a major lack of emergency savings, making surprise expenses potentially catastrophic, little to no retirement savings, shaky and costly healthcare access, leading to people skipping care and piling up medical debt, being more vulnerable to predatory loans, and often starting from a financially stressed position anyway. It really paints a picture of significant financial fragility for a huge part of this workforce.
It really does. And this is exactly what makes the next finding from the research so striking. It brings us right back to that paradox we kicked off with.
Okay.
Despite all these really well-documented financial vulnerabilities, gig workers report relatively high levels of financial confidence.
Huh. That is the paradox. How are we defining financial confidence here? It's not just knowing about finance, right?
Exactly. The sources define it more as a mix of things. Financial awareness, sort of understanding how to use money and tools to reach your goals. Some financial literacy or knowledge, sure, but also the availability of advice. It's less about having a perfect balance sheet right now and more about your belief in your own ability to manage your finances and achieve your goals down the line.
Your financial self-efficacy.
Precisely. And some research has even shown that this confidence, this self-efficacy, can actually be a better predictor of day-to-day financial habits like managing debt or exercising self-control than just knowing financial facts.
Okay, so it's about believing you can handle things and reach your goals, even if the current situation is tough. And the study found gig workers have more of this belief, despite all the data showing they face huge financial headwinds.
Yes. That's the really striking and, as the authors called it, illuminating disconnect. Table 3 in that Mitchell-Decker paper shows it clearly. People who reported doing any kind of extra work for pay were significantly more likely to say they felt somewhat or very confident about achieving a financial goal.
More confident than people not doing gig work.
Exactly. And they were less likely to report feeling not at all or not very confident.
And what about those using the tech platform specifically? Was the effect stronger there?
Even more pronounced, yeah. Respondents who frequently used tech-driven gig work reported much higher levels of being very confident, over 56%, compared to only about 30% of those who don't use tech gig work.
Wow, that's a big difference.
And even those who only sometimes use tech gig work reported higher rates of being somewhat confident compared to the non-users.
So it seems like across the board, doing gig work is statistically linked with reporting higher financial confidence.
And Table 4 really nails this down statistically with adjusted odds ratios. They confirm that positive link between various kinds of gig work and feeling somewhat or very financially confident. And crucially, that link held up even after they statistically controlled for a whole bunch of other factors we know influence confidence, like debt levels, income, age, sex, education.
So it's not just that, say, younger, more optimistic people happen to do gig work. There seems to be something about the work itself or the people drawn to it that connects to this confidence.
That's what the statistics suggest, yeah. And this disconnect between the objective financial precarity we just discussed and this subjective feeling of confidence, that's really the core puzzle here.
Right. The study authors called it illuminating because these workers have financial traits they described as, quote, less than ideal, high debt, using predatory loans, healthcare struggles, yet they hold this higher belief in their ability to hit financial goals. How do we even start to figure that out?
Well, it really forces you to think that the link between feeling confident about your finances and your actual financial behavior isn't just about having a perfect situation right now. Maybe, just maybe, the confidence comes from the perceived agency, the ability to hustle, to go out and earn money when you need it.
That makes intuitive sense. Like, if your hours get cut at a traditional job where you have a surprise expense, you might feel stuck.
Right.
But a gig worker might think, okay, I need an extra $500 this week. I'll just log more hours driving or pick up more delivery shifts. Does that feeling of having some control over your earning potential, even if the income itself is variable, fuel a belief that you can manage or improve things?
That sense of agency, that flexibility, it could absolutely play a huge role in building that confidence. On the flip side, though, there's the causality question the study couldn't answer.
The chicken and egg problem.
Exactly. Does doing gig work actually make you more confident over time? Or are people who are already more optimistic, more proactive, more self-reliant about earning money just the ones who are naturally drawn to the gig model in the first place? We don't know for sure yet.
That's a great question for future research. What else might explain it? Maybe just having to pay closer attention to their finances.
That's another really plausible factor. With income all over the place and being responsible for your own taxes, expenses, gig workers have to be more hands-on with their money.
Right. You can't just rely on a steady paycheck showing up.
No. And T. Rowe Price data from 2018 showed this. 78% of U.S. gig workers said they became more involved in managing their personal finances after starting gig jobs. And nearly 40% said they checked their accounts more often.
So maybe that constant engagement, that active management forced on them by the work itself, contributes to a feeling of being more in control or more knowledgeable, which then boosts their perceived confidence, even if the underlying numbers are still shaky.
It's very possible. That increased attention could definitely play a part.
And the optimism seems to look forward too. That Experian survey noted that most gig workers, except maybe the very youngest, remain optimistic about their financial futures.
Right, so it's not just confidence about managing today, but this belief that things will get better financially down the road.
Okay, so we have this really complex, almost contradictory picture, right? The gig economy pulls in millions with flexibility and extra income. It seems to foster this sense of financial confidence and optimism, maybe tied to agency or just being more engaged with their money.
The duty.
The hard data clearly shows these underlying financial vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
The debt, the lack of savings, the precarious healthcare, the risk of predatory loans.
Yep. And this complex reality creates a fundamental clash with the existing financial safety net in the U.S., especially traditional benefits. The system we have just wasn't designed for this kind of work.
Okay.
I mean, the bedrock of employer-provided benefits, health insurance, 401k, paid sick leave, paid vacation, it relies almost entirely on having a stable, continuous, usually full-time job with one single employer.
Which is the exact opposite of how much of the gig economy functions.
Totally. Gig workers, by definition, value flexibility. Many deliberately work varied hours, often across multiple platforms or clients over time. That Brookings analysis highlighted this. Remember the Uber driver survey data?
Yeah, what was it?
75% of drivers worked with at least one other platform, and over 40% worked with two or more. They're spreading their time around.
And even on one platform? Working consistent full-time hours is pretty rare, isn't it?
It's absolutely the exception, not the rule. And that's a key point people often miss. Uber's own internal data, cited by Brookings, was really eye-opening. Only 22% of their active workers hit 20-plus hours for 4 weeks in a row.
Only 22%.
Yeah, and only 13% hit 30-plus hours for 4 consecutive weeks. And if you look at working consistently every single week, less than 5% work 20-plus hours every week, and only 2% work 30-plus hours every week.
Wow. With that kind of variability, qualifying for traditional benefits is basically impossible.
Exactly. Standard benefit packages have waiting periods, right? 2 months for health insurance, maybe 90 days before you accrue sick leave. If your hours are constantly up and down or you're switching platforms, you might never meet those thresholds or stay eligible.
Plus, as we said, many are doing this part-time or as supplemental work anyway. And part-timers often don't get benefits even in traditional jobs.
That's another great point. Access for traditional part-timers is already limited. Only about 40% get retirement plan access, and only around 14% of firms that offer health insurance make it available to part-timers, according to Brookings. The gig economy just kind of magnifies these existing gaps.
So given this big mismatch, some people have pushed for just reclassifying gig workers as regular employees, like California tried with AB 5. But the sources suggest that might not be the perfect fix either.
Yeah, the Brookings analysis really critiques just trying to shoehorn gig workers into the old W-2 employee model. They make a couple of strong points. First, the traditional employer benefit system is already kind of eroding itself.
How's
Well, employer-sponsored health coverage has been declining for decades. So forcing gig workers into a system that's already potentially shaky isn't necessarily a great long-term solution.
Okay. And the second point relates back to what the workers themselves want.
Precisely. Reclassification under the traditional rules often comes with strings attached regarding scheduling, maybe not working for competitors, more employer control, things that could really limit the flexibility and autonomy that gig workers value so highly.
Right. The very reason many do it.
Exactly. Especially since most use it to supplement other income, forcing them into a rigid single-employer box might just break what works for them without even fully solving the benefits problem. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Okay, so if the traditional model doesn't fit, and just reclassifying them have a big downsides, what else is out there? Brookings proposed a specific new model, right?
They did. They put forward this idea of government-sponsored gig worker benefits platforms, or GWBPs for short.
Yeah, GWBPs. Okay.
Oh.
What's the core concept?
Yeah. The basic idea is to create a whole new system designed specifically for how gig work actually operates to provide a form of portable security. They drew lessons from surveys, including that one with Uber drivers.
So how would it work in practice?
Well, the vision is for these to be state-mandated platforms, maybe with a federal backup plan. They'd act as user-friendly digital hubs.
Hubs for what?
For receiving contributions from platforms, from workers themselves, and then helping workers allocate those funds towards a menu of portable benefits. They'd need clear rules about which employers and workers are included, maybe based on minimum platform revenue or worker activity levels. They even floated the idea of potentially including other self-employed folks later on. But success would really depend on solid funding and great software to make it easy to use.
Okay, the money. Where would the contributions come from? Who pays in?
The proposal suggests multiple streams. First, a mandatory minimum contribution from the platforms for workers earning over a certain amount, at least enough to cover basic injury benefits.
All right, a baseline from the platforms.
Right. Then, platforms could also make additional voluntary contributions, maybe as an incentive or perk. Crucially, workers themselves could contribute directly through the platform. And the platforms could even offer to match those worker contributions, which is a powerful way to encourage saving.
So platform money, worker money, maybe matching funds, all pooled together for each worker.
Exactly. Pooled together in the worker's individual GWBP account.
And what benefits would this pooled money actually buy? What's on the menu for the worker?
Two main categories. First, injury benefits. This would be mandatory for workers earning above state workers' comp minimums. It would basically mirror existing state programs, cover medical costs, provide some wage replacement if you're hurt on the job, could potentially even be managed through existing state WC systems.
Okay, so basic injury protection is covered. What's the second category? That sounds like where the choice comes in.
Exactly. This is the really innovative part. Gig workers would get to allocate their pooled funds across a menu of specific portable benefit options based on their own individual needs and priorities at that time.
Like healthcare.
Yes. The GWBP would link up with the state or federal ACA health insurance marketplaces. Workers could use the money in their GWBP account to buy a plan on the exchange, helping cover those premium costs. The platform could also help flag if someone qualifies for Medicaid or those $0 premium plans based on their income.
Makes sense. And retirement savings, that huge gap we talked about.
Definitely. The platform would make it easy to set up and contribute to an IRA, an individual retirement account. Workers could link an existing IRA or create a new one right there through the GWBP. Much easier than trying to manage it totally on your own with unpredictable income.
Okay. And what about that critical need for emergency savings, the $400 problem?
Absolutely essential. The GWBP would also facilitate setting up emergency savings accounts, or ESAs. And recognizing how hard it is for gig workers to build that cushion, the proposal suggests states could add features to encourage using these funds for real emergencies, not just, everyday spending.
How would they do that?
Maybe slight hurdles to withdrawal, or a vesting schedule where the money becomes fully accessible over a few years. States could also set limits on ESA balances, maybe automatically rolling any extra funds over into the retirement account once a decent emergency fund is built up.
Interesting. So the worker gets to decide where the money goes. Health, retirement, emergency fund reflecting their own situation.
That's the core idea. Acknowledge the diversity of needs. The proposal also suggests states could partner with financial providers, maybe using a reverse auction to get the lowest fees for these IRA and ESA accounts so workers aren't losing their savings to high costs. States could set default allocations, but workers could always change them.
I like the idea of making saving easier, maybe even nudging people toward it.
Yeah.
Did that Uber driver survey shed any light on whether workers would actually want more structured savings options?
It did, and the results were pretty positive. They found real enthusiasm for something like a Save More Tomorrow feature.
Remind me what that is.
It's where workers could choose to automatically save a portion of any earnings above a certain target income level. And when they presented this idea with matching contributions from the platform, a striking 80% of the surveyed drivers liked it.
80%. So even though they value flexibility, they also see the value in systems that help them commit to saving.
It strongly suggests that, yes.
Okay, quick question.
Let's look
What
up
about
that.
taxes?
Okay.
Traditional benefits often get preferential tax treatment. How would that work with this GWBP model?
That's a really key challenge they acknowledge. It would likely need some legal or legislative changes. IRA contributions could probably use existing tax-favored rules, but ESA contributions, unlikely to be tax-favored without new laws.
And health contributions.
Maybe could work through existing things like ISHRA-ERES or QSC ITRES. Those allow employers to give pre-tax money for individual insurance. But the rules would need adapting for gigs. The self-employed health deduction also needs clarity. Brookings does point out, though, that for many lower-income gig workers, their tax burden isn't huge anyway, so just getting the benefit might be more important than the tax break itself. But it definitely needs sorting out.
And navigating all these choices, health plans, retirement funds, savings accounts, sounds potentially complicated. How would workers get help?
That's critical. The model emphasizes the need for really good decision support tools. User-friendly ways to track money, tools to model different choices, maybe even access to financial counseling or live health. It has to be easy to navigate, not some confusing financial website.
Okay, so wrapping up the benefits part, did that Uber survey give any hints about which benefits workers valued most? Was there a clear winner?
It gave some useful clues, keeping in mind it was just Uber drivers and the response rate wasn't super high. But among those who did respond, they valued benefits highly overall. Nearly 30% said $1 towards retirement or flexible savings was worth more than $1 in cash right now.
More than $1, wow.
Yeah, another 15% valued it at $1. And when you factor in potential tax advantages, about half said they'd prefer $1 in retirement benefits over $1 in cash.
That's really telling. It suggests, despite the immediate money pressures, there's a real hunger for long-term security, a recognition that benefits matter beyond just the paycheck.
It does seem that way. And interestingly, they tended to value retirement and flexible savings accounts more than other options, even health insurance.
Other than health insurance, why?
Well, the analysis suggested it might be because many drivers in that specific survey already had health insurance from somewhere else, a spouse, another job. But for the drivers in the survey who were uninsured, health insurance was valued much more highly, almost as much as retirement, though still slightly less than those flexible savings accounts.
And their preference for committing to save came through clearly.
Yes. They valued commitment. Only a quarter wanted completely flexible withdrawals from savings. Another quarter preferred no choice, basically locking the money away, and half were indifferent. It backs up the potential appeal of things like that Save More Tomorrow feature.
And the final big takeaway from their preferences.
Diversity was key. The results showed that every single combination of sick leave, health insurance, and retirement benefits was the top choice for at least 8% of the sample. But no single combination was preferred by more than 25%.
So one size definitely does not fit all.
Absolutely not. It really reinforces the need for that worker choice model in the GWBP proposal. You can't just pick one package and expect it to work for this incredibly diverse workforce.
Okay, let's try and bring all these different threads together now. We've seen the U.S. gig economy is huge, it's growing fast, attracting millions of different kinds of workers, often looking for extra income, drawn by that flexibility and autonomy.
Right.
We've taken a deep dive into the data that shows, pretty starkly, the significant financial challenges many face: the high debt, the lack of emergency and retirement savings, the shaky access to healthcare leading to skipped care and medical debt, the vulnerability to predatory lending.
And running right through all of that, we've highlighted this fascinating paradox. Despite those very real, objective financial problems, many gig workers report this relatively high level of confidence in their ability to reach their financial goals. A confidence perhaps rooted in that feeling of agency, or maybe just the fact they have to pay closer attention to their money.
Yeah. And this whole complex picture just fundamentally clashes with our traditional ways of providing benefits, systems built for a world of stable, long-term, single-employer jobs that just isn't the reality for so many anymore.
Which leads us to this urgent need for new thinking, new solutions, moving beyond just trying to jam gig workers into an old model that doesn't really fit. Proposals like those government-sponsored benefit platforms aim to build something new, a portable safety net.
Right? Letting contributions from platforms and workers get pooled, and then letting the worker direct those funds flexibly to meet their own needs: injury protection, health insurance, retirement, emergency savings.
So the core tension that really comes out of this deep dive is that disconnect, isn't it? Between the optimism and confidence many gig workers feel and the underlying financial vulnerabilities the data clearly shows.
Yeah.
And the big question for everyone, policymakers, the platforms themselves, society, is how do we build financial systems and safety nets that actually support this evolving workforce, that acknowledge and preserve the flexibility they value, but also tackle the very real financial precarity so many are dealing with?
It really makes you think. As work keeps changing, moving further away from that traditional 9-to-5 with the benefits package, are we actually building financial systems that reflect how people earn a living now? Or are we, maybe through inaction or just sticking with outdated structures, leaving this huge and growing part of the workforce exposed, requiring them to rely on hustle and hope in the face of some pretty significant systemic challenges? What does it really mean to be financially secure in a world where work looks less and less like it used to?
That is definitely something to chew on long after this deep dive ends.
Indeed, a lot to consider.
For sure.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.